Chief, can you do me a favor and get Dr. Jackson? Good morning, everybody. We will call the April 11th, 2022 special work session to order. We are here today to discuss next steps in our strategic plan. We have had a change on the team. We were using a group out of USF. They have gathered some data. Today we have Dr. Jackson from St. Pete College, who's going to be here helping us facilitate. I did hand out something that I had generated back when Mr. Horn and Ms. Aiken were here. I thought it was a framework of questions that would help us on a path for strategic planning. I'm hopeful that we will get something done this morning. I will tell you I am not happy with this process. I don't think it has been a good one. Things obviously broke down with the group from USF. We have gathered some information from citizens through questionnaires, but I still want to see us go out into the public and have individual meetings at rec centers, because I don't think we've put things into context for people. What I found with our previous strategic planning and doing strategic planning with other not-for-profits is you still have to put things within the context of our overall budget. Because if you just put a wish list together, it can be endless. Just like it could if you asked your kids what they want for Christmas. But obviously as a parent, we have limited resources, and so you prioritize, you triage, and I think that starts with our citizens figuring out what they want, where they want our energy, our time, and our resources going towards. And I don't think we're there yet, but maybe this will sift down to some of the priorities that all of us have through the process today, but I think there's a lot more to go. So I just want to preface the conversation with that, having gone through this process on many occasions. And if we don't go the right direction, I am willing to scrap what we've done and start over. But I'm really dissatisfied with what we've done to date. I just think it's been a very long time frame that we've been looking at, and hopefully some of the things I gave you on this list, which I produced 9-10 months ago, I think it synthesizes down some of the things we at least need to talk about, not only from priorities but from philosophy. So, any other comments before I turn it over to Dr. Jackson, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I too am frustrated. I don't want to start off on a negative foot, but so I've been here 2 years. The three of us ran on looking at and updating our strategic plan. I've mentioned from this dais, it must have been 15 different times, can we do this? Can we do that? Should we be looking at this? What is the priority of that? And the response has generally been, we're going to cover that with a strategic plan. We'll answer that with a strategic plan. Planning, right? And developing our updated strategic plan, and we don't have it. And it's been 2 years of, I feel like I've been given a stiff arm, or others have, as in we're not doing that. And so then my understanding today is, while it says a discussion of strategic plan today, my understanding is that we're giving direction on simply this year's budget priorities and not our overarching strategic plan and philosophy, because we have pressing needs to develop a budget and get that approved. And so once again, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the focus of this meeting is not developing our philosophical strategic plan, the one pager, because I have our current strategic plan, it's a It's the one I pass out at different times, but it's not this. It's more guidance about our budget priorities at this moment, and not including ARPA funds at this moment. So if I'm mistaken about our purpose today, but I think in a perfect world, we would have an updated strategic plan right now that we use as a guide for the next 6 to 10 years. And then we have annual meetings where we talk about what is our focus with that strategic plan each year as you know, it lives out its life of 6 to 10 years or whatever. But when we're having our discussion today, I'm wondering, what is our guiding document? Is it the current strategic plan? I mean, what is going to inform, you know, our priorities? Or is it just each individual person talks about their priorities and gives budgetary guidance today?
Well, you'll never have a strategic plan that's going to last 6 to 10 years. They're a living, breathing document, and at least have to be updated, in my opinion, every 5 years. But
So
they can be
when was this one?
updated. It's over. I think it's at least 10 years old.
This one is at least 10 years old?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be updated more frequently than that. Obviously, there's external factors that are always affecting a strategic plan. And that's one of the reasons you want to have a strategic plan, is when you have those externalities, you can deal with them because you have focus and you have priorities. But Mr. Jennings, what is your hope for the work product for today?
Well, to me, this is the next phase. There was an earlier phase that when I came in as city manager that was ongoing. It wasn't the most conducive process, I thought. And after talking with many of you, you felt the same way. And so today was a step into the development of the strategic plan and not just the budget. In fact, the strategic plan helps inform budget priorities. And so that's certainly the intent that Dr. Jackson and I spoke about, and others. So,
Any other comments from council? Dr. Jackson, good morning, welcome.
Morning. Looks like we have some work to do today. So before I begin, I just want to address some of the things you said. I had the pleasure of speaking to you all individually, but it's nice to see faces in the room and really try to connect. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for the public, since this is recording, this is a formal setting. And then I'm going to try to break down what I heard individually and collectively and try to synthesize what you all want, even though we have very different perspectives, and that's fair to say. So first, my name is Kimberly Jackson. For the purposes of today, please call me Kimberly. I am an attorney by trade in the educational context. Because I have a dead-end degree, they call me doctor. But as an attorney, it's always very uncomfortable. Just call me Kimberly is fine. I am not from here, but I've been here since 1997. I am from a small town in Illinois called Crete, Illinois. I grew up there. I went to Spelman College, where I met the love of my life, who is from Pinellas County, which is how I got here, and quickly fell in love with you all's commitment to quality of life, which I do hear from all of you all individually, even though you have very respective different views. I went to Johns Hopkins and got my master's in international public policy, and then I went to Stetson University College of Law. I was a practicing attorney in the area for about 12 years before I switched over to education. I switched over to education because my younger daughter has autism, and it changed my lens and focus on what my priorities were. And because of that, I had a good sense as a former city attorney for the city of St. Pete of how communities matter, how we change lives in a different way, different so than I did in the private sector. And also, I serve as a board member on several nonprofits, and because of that, I also know how the nonprofit sector engages both the private and the government sector for us all to try to work to make quality of life better. So I hear and receive what you all said about the process and the frustration, and I want to say that I'm a fresh eye. Let's put it that way. You all only recently contacted me a couple of weeks ago. We are not getting reimbursed for this. This is a service that we want to do as the Institute. The college, as you all know, way more than me, Congressman Bill Young left a think tank at St. Petersburg College to do social, political, and economic nonpartisan discussion, to create bridges, to have true facilitation about the appropriate scope of government. I take that role very seriously, and anything that we can do at the college to try to support that, I'm willing to do. So I'm going to sort of change what I did in light of your icebreaker, and I'm going to try to start with your icebreaker since this is what you had.
Don't feel any obligation.
I don't feel any
This is
obligation. I just,
an
when you
aged
have,
document.
it's actually a good one. I might take it for future things. So I've not lived in Clearwater. I've already shared where I'm from, a little bit about my family. I have 2 daughters. I mentioned one. I have an older daughter who is making a decision this week about her PhD program for English and theater. She currently lives in Atlanta, and I'm proud to say she got into Berkeley, WashU, Emory, and Northwestern, and she's a proud product of Canterbury and St. Pete IB. Do I have pets? Yes, I have a sheepadoodle. Formerly, I had a Great Dane, and formerly a chow mixed with an Akita. I can see I'm an avid dog lover. 2 hobbies. I read a lot, and I'm a dancer. Ballerina by trade, and still enjoy doing that with Academy Ballet of Arts. Where do I like to vacation? Any place that's cold. No offense to all the Floridians. It's very hot here most of the year. And what was the first concert you ever went to and where? As a kid, I got the privilege to go see the Jackson 5. It was a really big deal. I was like 11 years old. And it was a transformational moment for me as a child in Chicago. Okay, so I've done the icebreaker. Before we get back into business, and I'm going to ask you all to do the same, I do want to talk about some of the things that you all mentioned during your comments. First, we said the process. Collaboration is never easy, and it takes some time. And so today you may not get anything done, and I want to be very clear, I'm not magical, right? This requires good faith effort, discussion, and if you all move the needle 2 notches, then I think that's enough, right? Of course, at some point you have to set a deadline for when you're going to make true, significant progress. But if you haven't had the time to have a conversation where you can agree on 2 to 3 tenets of your structural priorities, then this is just talk, and it's good to have those conversations. I always say, for example, in anyone's household, you can have very divergent views, and at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision. But it takes some time for someone to process that their decision might not be the primary one. And for any good collaboration, everyone cannot have the same process. Everyone's not going to be happy at the end of a really good mediation. Something has to be let go. And I think I've talked to you all individually about that. So in terms of discussion, I agree. If you had a strategic plans are living and breathing documents. They are fluid, and they are most important to inform your budget. And so if you don't have a strong strategic plan, then you may not get very far today. But what you can do is set further meetings to try to move the needle a little bit more to get to this process. I talked about having a good faith conversation today. I think I've heard individually from what you all are interested in, but I think the time is now to refocus the energy, if you will. You all know what the challenges are, and I would like to just ask everyone to pivot a little bit to decide on what you want to accomplish today. So with that being said, even though many people in your community probably know a little bit about you, I'd love it if you all would do the icebreaker that was created, if that's okay. And I'll take any volunteers, but I am an educator and attorney, and I'm willing to call names too.
We'll start from my left.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. I was born to Portuguese immigrants. I moved here about 25 years ago to Clearwater. I have a daughter, Bianca, who's now living in Vancouver, and I have a son, Lucas, who's in college in Vermont. I used to have a little mutt as well as a chihuahua, but my daughter took them away. My hobbies are fashion and photographic direction, coming up with a concept, and I think that really is one of my passions. Where do I vacation? In the past, because I have family everywhere, I always tended to go there. But now that I'm an empty nester, I want to explore other places. So, so far, I'm really focusing on Europe. I enjoyed a lot. And my first concert was Run DMC in downtown Montreal. Yeah.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing. I'll have to ask you more about photographic direction. I've never heard of that, but thank you.
Councilmember Bunker?
Well, my name is Mark Bunker, and I have been here full-time since 2013. I spent a couple of years here back in 2000 and 2001, and I missed it. I was in San Diego for 10 years working in TV news, and when the big meltdown of the economy happened in 2008, I managed to survive a couple more years there at the station, but eventually we were all let go. And I thought, well, I want to come back here because this has been the most fascinating point of my life. And I wanted to see if I could make a difference. I don't have any kids, unfortunately. I have a brother who lives in Costa Rica, and I had planned to go and see him and his wife around this time. But then there were some medical issues on my part and his wife's part that kept me away from that. So sometime later this year, we're going to go trooping around Costa Rica, which would be fun. The favorite place I've been to is London. I would love to go back there as often as I could. As far as hobbies, I'm an avid moviegoer. A fan of everything from silent films to modern day. I also tinker with computers. I've built my own in the past and enjoy creating websites and videos for the web and surfing the net. And I think I've covered my first concert? Okay, this is a good one because it's an answer to a security question on some site, and I never get the right answer. The first concert that I actually went to, I was working backstage, and that was Alice Cooper when he came through Wisconsin, and I was in college. I got to work backstage on a few events back then, including there was a Blackstone Jr., the magician, came through with his troupe, and I got to see the way a lot of the tricks were done, and it was eye-opening how simple these illusions are. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's quite interesting.
Vice Mayor?
So I'm Kathleen Beckman. My husband and I bought our townhome in Clearwater in 2012 and rented it out for 4 years, and then we moved here in 2016 after we both retired from Northern Illinois. And we have 3 children. They're adults. They're grown. We have a daughter and our son and daughter-in-law who live in Chicago, Josh and Mary Beth. Our daughter Sarah lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and our youngest son Michael and his wife Megan live in Washington, D.C. We had pets when the kids were younger. We had lab mixes that we adopted and loved them very much, but we don't have pets right now. We're big dog people. My hobbies, I love to cook and I love to be outside, hiking, biking, just being outside. Like to vacation. I think one of our favorite vacations was Zion and Bryce and the national parks out west, and again, just a lot of hiking and time without crowds and lines and things like that. And I was thinking about the first concert. You know, what I do remember thinking about the first concert is we took like a family camping trip. We used to rent a pop-up camper that you towed on a car. You know, we had Oldsmobile sedans because we lived in Lansing, and we drove to Toronto, and I think his name is Arthur Fiedler, the famous conductor, and he was out there doing a practice. They were rehearsing for a concert, and it was an outdoor venue, so we just sat there for a couple hours and watched that. practice go on. It was fascinating. So that's what it's not really a concert, but it left a big impression. Yeah.
Councilmember Albritton.
Well, I've lived here all my life. My grandfather moved here, I guess, during midlife. He still was born in Florida, but came to Clearwater. So my parents were born and raised here as well. I've got a brother and two sisters, and I have 3 children, 3 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild, and another one on the way in June, I think. I've had pets all my life, mostly dogs. I went through one period where I had a cat, and I like dogs better. But now, we don't have, we had 2 little dogs that lived to 18, and they passed away a couple years ago. We decided not to get another one because we thought we'd travel more. And, but I do have a big saltwater aquarium. I got 3 fish in there, so. Where do I like to vacation? I love America. Anywhere in America. I've been to Hawaii. I love Colorado, like you. I like cool places to go to, the mountains. North Carolina seems to be the closest cool place to go. And, I can get there in a day, and it's a good family gathering spot. Out of the country, I think my favorite place is Scotland. That's a very neat country. My hobbies, I'm a musician. I love music. I've always loved music. And I love any water sports. I'm a boater. I'm a swimmer. I'm an offshore swimmer. I'm a distance swimmer. Our whole family was raised swimming. My brother, who's taller, is a very fast swimmer. He's a 50 and 100-yard record holder on the distance. So it's funny to see the piano fall on his back in about a half mile, and I'm still going. But always enjoyed that, and it'd be hard for me to get away from the water because of that. My first concert, so the music thing goes back to when I was in my teens, and in the 60s were very, music changed in the 60s. We had rock music come in, with the Beatles and everything, but the city had a thing called Star Spectacular here, and I'm bringing that up because it's amazing, I think. Back in the 60s, Clearwater was a small community, about 28,000 people, but we had every major group that was famous in America, and even the Rolling Stones came to Clearwater, 1965. My first concert was, I'm trying to think back what it was, either the Beach Boys or Otis Redding. And it was right down here in a little Clearwater Auditorium back at City Hall. Monthly, we would have somebody come in from, that was famous, and it was just amazing because, Clearwater being so small, a lot of the local talent got to meet some famous people and kind of spurred them to move on to become famous. So we kind of have a special area here. A lot of people don't know that, but anyway, that's a little bit about myself.
I've lived here for 43 years, came in 79 from Chicago. We have 2 kids, Spencer and Whitney. They both live locally. Spencer has 3 children, so we have 3 grandchildren, one with special needs. Huge dog lover. Have had 3 Great Danes. Currently have 2 golden retrievers. So I play golf and read a lot. Several books, 3 or 4 books a month. Where do we like to vacation? Carmel, California, especially in July, August, or September to get away from the heat here. And it's always cool up there. And my first concert was Cheap Trick at Ravinia, which is a great music venue in the northern suburbs of Chicago. And I hope the coachman will be very much like that, because I have some fond memories of running around the park while my parents were at a concert, but, so,
That's wonderful. So I have more in common with the last couple of comments. I honeymooned in Carmel, and my husband just took me to our 25th anniversary to Zion. We had to hike in the middle of the summer, which was not the greatest, but he's an avid outdoors person, which is why we're always outside. He's a triathlete, and he's at Clearwater. He rides as one of the crazy bicyclists. Sorry to say that, I'm talking about my husband, not everyone collectively, who rides 75 miles from our house in Snell all the way down to Clearwater, all the way across the bay to Tampa, to Bayshore, and all the way back. So when you see that group, look for a gray-haired gentleman. That's my husband, who's a part of the weekly group that goes through your beautiful city. So thank you so much for sharing, because I think it's important for people to have perspectives about what's important to you. And thank you so much for creating that icebreaker. The icebreaker is a wonderful icebreaker. I had some of my own, but I think that one was a really perfect place to start. I want to follow up with that and ask you to, of course, again, ask your peers to say what you love best about Clearwater, and then we'll follow up with priorities after that, sir.
it's fun.
So if you want to control who speaks first.
We'll start from my right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
What do I like best about Clearwater?
Yes, or love about Clearwater, because I think that it's important to share about the priorities. And for everyone, but it's very interesting coming from someone who is generationally here.
I'd say the people. The people here are very special. They're very warm. I think we have a lot of conservative values here, going back just the history of families going forward. I would say that's number one. You know, if we had weather like we have today, every day of the year, it would be 3 times the population we have now, but that's why we have that control valve in the summer, September's and August, so a lot of people say, I can't come, it's too hot. But I like the heat, so I like the weather here in Clearwater. I think we get, I'm not a big, really getting cold person. I like going, see snow for about a week and that's it. That's all I can handle. So the weather would be number 2, and you know, I think everybody shares in that, because that's why we have so many people here. I mean, we really do have a lot of, I think people find people of Clearwater warm. So I'd leave it at that. I think we got a lot of great things. It's a great place to live, work, and play. I mean, that pretty much describes Clearwater.
Vice Mayor?
I would say the people, the location, and the environment.
Councilmember Walker?
Yeah, people are terrific here. It's a wonderful, casual place to live. Plenty of fun things to do. And I've had a chance to meet a lot of the people who've had long history here in Clearwater. It's always fascinating to hear their tales.
When we moved down here, my husband and I, right after we got married, it was supposed to be temporary. We were supposed to just do travel nursing. But we loved it here so much, and there's so many things to say, you know, what we love about, but it's basically how I feel. So as much as I love to travel, the best way to describe it is when I land in the airport and I go down Courtney Causeway, that feeling of coming home, the warmth that's how the best way to summarize it is how Clearwater makes me feel welcome.
I think we're, have all the amenities of a big city, but it's got a small city feel. We also have incredible diversity as far as our neighborhoods. You can be in a historic neighborhood, suburban neighborhood, urban neighborhood, obviously the beach communities. There's something for everybody. I don't think you can narrow it down to one. We have incredible quality of life. Our parks and rec libraries, I would put up against anybody, not only in the state, but the country, especially per capita. And most importantly, we're safe.
So what I heard, which is something I'm very happy about, is total alignment. You all said literally almost the exact same thing. People, warmth, location, and this feeling of community and depth. And I can say honestly, having traveled in a lot of circles, people love Clearwater. I try to say that there are a lot of cities in Florida you can come to, but they always say Clearwater. So you all have a special place. You definitely have a special place. Now that we've shared a little bit about who we are and what we care about the city, I would like you to delicately walk about some concerns before we get to priorities. And again, sir, I'd like you to control which way we flow, unless you want to create an order of going back and forth.
I'm just going to go back and forth.
Okay, that's fine. So then I think you started that way this
I
time,
did.
so maybe this way back.
In terms of concerns, I guess I'm going to focus on what I heard during my campaigning, which is I had a lot of
Oh, and
exposure.
excuse me, can I limit you to 3 concerns?
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
So I just want to really focus on what I heard rather than specifically what I think is a concern. The first concern is that that there's a culture of between the citizens in the city, of the processes being difficult and laborious. So kind of really improve any processes where there's a direct impact with the citizens, whether it be permitting or codes or zoning or any service that we provide directly to the citizens is something that's been expressed to me a lot. There's a disconnect as well, so I like to also reiterate what Mayor Hibbert said about us being more engaged. There's a lot of people who expressed that there's a disconnect between neighborhoods and not feeling that they're getting all the information, so that would be a second one. And then my third priority, which is diversifying our economy and making sure that we're healthier and have more industries here and provide more higher paying jobs. Because right now we're so centered on service industry and hospitality. So actually bring more baskets and diversifying where we put those eggs so that we can provide our citizens more opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, besides my basic concern of Scientology's impact on the downtown, I am concerned that we don't seem to be doing a good job of engaging the different communities and listening to their needs. And I'm certainly happy that John Jennings, when he came in, immediately started saying, okay, let's fix the sidewalks that have been in disrepair for so long. I think we need to do much more of that, just help people in the communities every way we can and give them a greater advance notice when changes are about to be made.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
So 3 priorities, I would say we need resources and staffing to get the work done in our city. We need to set measurable goals in our priority areas and allocate resources to reach those goals. And we need to address our housing challenges and understand what are the levers that we can utilize as a city to address that crisis.
Can you repeat the second one for me again?
Setting measurable goals in our priority areas and then allocating the resources necessary to reach those goals.
Thank you.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Okay, well, I kind of agree. Processes in our city need to be looked at, but part of that is we are definitely top heavy on. We don't have enough Indians and too many chiefs maybe. So that's hampering the process of trying to change that. But, everybody's having that issue. We just need to, well, anyway. The second thing would be downtown rejuvenation. And that kind of ties in with my third one. Other areas of Clearwater besides downtown and the beach want us to keep them in our thoughts, and not just, you talk to people in the countryside, they say all you think about is downtown and the beach. Well, the beach is pretty much a done deal. Downtown, we've struggled for 50 years getting that rejuvenated. I think we're going on the right track, but we still need to be thinking about the rest of Clearwater, and the US 19 core is a good way to do that. So, I mean, we've had the planning for it, to set it up, we just need to follow it through.
Kimberly, we just had Neighborhoods Day, which we had 30 neighborhoods have block parties, and I'm just going to throw an editorial comment out there before I give you my three. Having traveled to 16 of the 30, I think this narrative that everybody is displeased is somewhat bogus. I just didn't hear it out in the neighborhoods, and everybody felt very free to talk about anything that they were concerned about, and I really just didn't hear it. I think there is a vocal minority that isn't happy with certain things. But I am always concerned about limited resources. I'm in my 13th year now with an 8-year hiatus. And take this all in the spirit it's meant. Nobody up here has lived through bad economic times while on this dais. And I am concerned that we will have another downturn. COVID did not turn out to really hurt us economically within the city. And I just think we always need to be prepared for that next recession or next crisis that comes. And I go back to 9/11 and what happened with tourism, the fact that we're too dependent. 9/11, the Great Recession, the Deep Horizon oil spill, red tide, we're so diversifying our economy, which has already been mentioned. We need to do a better job of that. And then what we're here for today, which I think we lack strategic focus. I don't think we have come to grips with what our priorities are as a council. And it's been something I was speaking about back in the 2000 election. I think it's critically important. I use strategic planning in my own business. And so this is overdue. We need to get it done and then help it to guide our future expenditures and everything else we do within the city. I think the citizens deserve to understand what the focus is, and they don't have that right now.
I'm going to ask for one more round of questions and a quick break to utilize your staff to see if we can get some type of working document that we all can write on, if that's possible. Since I see that you all are writing, I'm writing as well. Sort of mixed myself up going back and forth, so I had to re-scribble.
Well, we can go left to right if you prefer.
It's fine. I figured it out now because you're always last, so that's
I'm not
great.
that rigid
Yeah,
most of the time.
People, well, he would say that about me. So, thank you, of course, for sharing what you love and what your concerns are. And that's going to lead into priorities next, but not now, after we come back. The strategic plan that you all worked in the past, is there anything, and I understand that you said it's about 10 years old?
Nobody on this dais has anything to do with that document is the problem.
Okay, got it. So that's very, very helpful. So then I'm going to scrap that question because I don't even know how familiar you all or how much you care to port over, if anything at all, from that document to a new document. So instead of asking you the question I was about to ask you about that, if you had to prioritize from a budgetary thought process, not asking to confine you, if you had to prioritize, what would be your priority? And I'm going to ask you just to list one because we're trying to come up with priorities, and there are 5 of you. So if we're going to create a strong, at least start for strategic priorities, it would be helpful to synthesize that information. And I know it's a hard question.
Are you okay with us rotating?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Councilmember Albritton?
That's a hard one. I have so many things spinning in my head, but I think one of the things that is of concern now, just because of the market, is affordable housing. We need to think about how we can plan the future to level the playing field for developers to be able to offer more affordable housing instead of market rate housing. Because most of our economy is based on the service industry. We have a lot of people working in the service industry in Clearwater. And we're changing that as well, but I'd say more than half don't even live in Clearwater because they can't afford it. So, to me, that's something we need to really be thinking about, whether we up the density in areas that allow, that's kind of a talk about where we're going in the community. And that's a community discussion, because even though a lot of people are concerned about it, a lot of people say, well, I really don't want it in my neighborhood, but, we need to have it. So we need to be figuring that out, where we're going to do it and what kind of incentives we can bring forward. We've got a lot of help all the way from state through county, in that it doesn't have to be us on our shoulders completely, but we need to be planning for that.
Vice Mayor?
I would say appropriate funding for staffing to get the work done is the number 1 priority.
Councilmember Bunker?
Did you ask for the number 1 thing that is currently in the strategic plan that
No, sir, but thank you for asking for the clarification. I would like to know from your priority, from a budgetary perspective. I'm not asking to pin you down, but it is helpful for us to know where your priorities that aligns with the budget. So that way, when we're crafting language, at least as a starting measure for strategic plans, we each have 1, and that will give a strong 5-prong space to start.
Well, I'm going to have to go with affordable housing as well, because it is such a crisis now everywhere. But one of the reasons I moved back here was it was far less expensive to live here than in San Diego. And, it's still probably cheaper than San Diego, but I'm stunned at how much rent has risen for folks here. And that's one key thing that I would like us to address.
Thank you.
This is so tough for me. I still haven't decided what my priority is. I'm flipping all of, it's so hard because the laundry list is huge. I guess if we can go back to the basics in terms of budgetary, I guess because of the ripple effect, make the city government efficient and all the processes, because in the big picture, the ripple effect would be positive in all the other things that I think are priority. So definitely streamlining the processes, making sure that our staff and our departments are well-staffed and all that. Simply because there's the ripple effect will pour into all the other priorities that I think are important.
And before you go, let me say, I realize how difficult this is. I don't want to, this is why there's been challenges in the past, right? That's with any organization or entity. When we don't pin ourselves down because we all care about the community, or you all wouldn't be here doing what you do, sacrificing your time as public servants. So, of course, you're listening to your neighbors, your peers, your community leaders, people that you value, businesses, people that you travel with, nationally or globally. And so there are a lot of priorities you care about. And what you care about personally may not be something that feeds into what is important for the community as a whole. But I do think when there have been challenges in the past, that less is more, because less is more starts a stronger conversation about how do we address the most pressing issues. And then hopefully by addressing those pressing issues, you will get to the root of some of the other issues, and you will likely find that they cross over in many different areas. So thank you for your patience with that.
Well, I have a hierarchy that I believe local government ought to have, and there are certain things that I think should be priorities within local government. I believe in us staying in our lanes between federal, state, county, and local, and I told you that on the phone, Dr. Jackson, or Kimberly.
Kimberly?
But public safety would be my number one. I think it is the foundation on which we build our city, and then your priorities stem from that. So, now I'm hearing you want to take a break.
I would like to take
How
a
long
break. I didn't
do you
want to
think you
interrupt
need?
the flow of the conversation. If there's anything you also want to add, just any one of your staff, I'd like the staff to help me put these 5 priorities and sort of try to gel my notes really quick on one working document, give each of you all the working document, so in the next hour, we can start talking about ideas to implement this. So now that we've created priorities, what ideas do we have to try to support these strategic plans? And then finally, in the last hour, creating at least strong strategic statements, and then you all can discuss from there how you prioritize that from a budgetary perspective. I hope that's helpful. So are there any other comments before, and if that's okay to you, staff, or, okay?
Yeah, I just think I'm fine with where you're trying to go. I still don't think we built in a large enough component yet of feedback from citizens. And I think we can start to create a framework of priorities up here, but I think the citizens' feedback has to guide some of our priorities, and I still don't think we've done that to the extent that I would anticipate, and that citizens are going to buy into what the strategic plan is. So if we can narrow our focus, there's also some questions that I'd really like us to discuss that do go back to philosophy.
Got it.
And we have not had that conversation. And we do have a new member with Councilmember Teixeira, but there's some questions at some point that I would like to discuss. I don't know if today is the day, but there are things that I put in my document that we need to resolve
Okay.
because it's going to impact where we do put resources. And we just haven't had the conversation.
So then, I would say that, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you. And not just for purposes of agreeing with you, as former staff, as former city attorney, and all of your staff who have to implement everything you all say. It is really important to get the neighborhood feedback, because no one wants to start and do all of that work and then hear from the community, bless you, that is not what we wanted at all. And so you mentioned 30 neighborhoods, and I would submit that at some point you all need to collectively and individually hear, so that there is not this that directly impacts resources, energy, support, fatigue from the people who are implementing what you are asking them to do. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. And to the resolving issues, although I don't know them directly, I would say now is the time. The more that is pushed off, the harder it will be to achieve your goal. And so if this is a space where you all have dedicated 3 hours of time to listen to each other, to talk and to address the issues, even if you don't get anywhere, at least it's out there for you all to discuss. And as I said in the beginning, I'm not magical, I'm a facilitator. It is highly unlikely that you can get to an end product in 3 hours on one day. What you are creating today is the space for conversation, the space to find out where you align on, the space to drop off where you don't align on and not focus it because there's nothing you can do about it, and to try to have some type of working document moving forward so the city can benefit. So with that being said, Is there anybody else who wanted to make a comment? Because it was very well received, and thank you.
Anything? Councilmember Teixeira?
Maybe it's because I'm the newest member here. I can't help but feel like we've skipped steps, and I just kind of want to be like regrouping, because I agree that before we even start forming a strategic plan, and perhaps maybe because I'm new, I just feel like we need to have deeper conversation about what we really, our philosophy and all that. But it might be because I'm new and I feel like I'm thrown in, but I just feel like thinking about the document, I think is too soon. I would like a greater understanding about where everyone else is on various subjects. But that's my personal feeling, and it might be.
Councilmember Albrecht?
So what I'm hearing here, we're not too far, at least where we've gone off from each other. I mean, as everybody's talking, especially the last question, I'm like, yeah, that could be my number one thing, So I don't think we're far off yet, but I think we have a lot of other things to talk about and bring into that. So I like the way we're starting to build on this. And maybe a question would be, and I know you asked me this over the phone, what would I disagree with on that? Try to bring us together as we're talking, because that'll help us sort through what is our priorities.
Right, and so again, but what both of you are saying, and what all of you are saying, is really the same thing. Working documents take time to perfect and perfect and perfect and perfect. So what you're doing here today is just collaborating. Again, it's just highly unlikely to create a specific document that all of you all will agree to in 3 hours. Even in my best mediations, that did not occur. I may have settled it 2 or 3 months later, but I at least started the conversation, right? So what you're doing today as we keep collating the information is, now you all are in each other's brains. You can take the document, you can go to your constituents, you can go collectively to talking sessions, to town halls, to basketball and football games, and you can start getting the read, and you can sort of hone this. Again, at some point there becomes a due date where you have to tie what you want to finances, and everyone may not be happy with that product, but hopefully you align on 3 to 5 things that matter to everyone in Clearwater. Okay. But if that's okay, sir, may we have a 10-minute break?
Yes. So we'll reconvene at, let's make it 3 minutes after 10.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, maybe so. Because I would be like, ah, the pictures aren't working. I know, it's like when that
The
person
pressure
goes.
scene? I couldn't, yeah, no.
There's that meme. I can do anything until somebody, tries to watch me.
So I purposely selected said, but they do shorthand. Oh, yeah. So shorthand is still beautiful art. And I speak so rapidly and I would forget quickly. And so they finally said, Miss Francis, how do what feels
I met a clerk who did shorthand, and I'm like, I just looked at her, I'm like, oh, she's beautiful.
Yes.
And
She
she's
looks like
just like, yeah, I'm like, and I'm like, wait. Give me a second. Okay, sure. Yes, go do that. That's right. Okay.
So if you want to get back on while she's printing, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we'll just wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have escalated my patience. With her
When the time
transition of
comes, when the
tone.
copies come. I'm assuming they put us back on, Joelle.
She's putting it on program B.
I understand, I just, okay. We will reconvene the April 11th special work session. Kimberly?
Okay. So first, thank you all for your patience. It's hard to collate that information quickly, and I'd like to thank, I'm sorry, your name? Nicole for doing an outstanding job. I speak very quickly. She dictated very quickly, so we're not going to make any comments on how quickly she did. If there's any issue, she did an outstanding job, saying that for the record. Yes. So the reason why I like to have the documents together, which you all will get a paper document shortly, is so that you all can hear and visually see and process, and everyone's a different type of learner of what you said. So I know that I didn't get everything completely accurate, but you all have the record for that. I tried to summarize to the extent possible what you said. So when you actually get the paper, what I'm hoping that we can do next is start layering what you thought. So while we're waiting for that, can you all scroll while I talk? Okay. So of course, you indicated your priorities was efficiency, streamlining the processes, having well staff. You said your concerns was process with the city, communication, diversifying the economy, and you love the fact that you always feel welcome here. You feel like you're coming home here. And then you said, sir, that your priority was affordable housing, and that your concerns were engaging different communities and providing help on basic municipal services and greater advance notice. And similarly, you said you love the people, it's a casual place, and it's fun. And we're correcting as we go, so again. Thank you so much. And scrolling down, Mayor, you said that public safety was your number one concern. It all starts there, that there's not enough neighborhood input, and that you have concerns regarding what happens during a recession or crisis, that we need to diversify the economy. What you loved about the city is that this is a small city, but we have big city amenities, that we're diverse, and that there's something for everyone, and that we're literally the best in terms of park and recs and services in the state and around the country.
I'd add libraries, I also said in there.
In libraries. We're just going to say the best. Put best in bold, and I think we'll.
Okay.
That'll come. And scroll down to the next one. And again, your working documents, and she's changing this in real time, might be slightly different. Vice Mayor, you said appropriate funding for staffing, and your concerns were resources for staffing, allocation of resources. I believe you said housing and having measurable goals. I was writing my own writing, so really fast. I hope I got that. Again, you all said people, location, and environment. Although you said it in different ways, you literally said the same thing, which is really wonderful to hear. And then finally, you said affordable housing. Your concerns were downtown rejuvenation and jobs and the service industry, which is why you care about that, and that you love the fact that the people here, the weather, and conservative values. So again, this is just a brief summary of what you all took the first hour to talk about, which I think is important for you to see, that you align on a lot of issues, and from a strategic plan space, you essentially said resources, safety, and housing, and I think most cities would say the exact same thing. So I wanted you to hear that you are aligned, how you get to that alignment, what your thought processes are on implementation is where the work has to be done, which is why you have those 4 bullets. So when you get to the document that you have, I would like you to start writing down, as we're talking, your thought process on how do we get there. So you mentioned before we left about a question I asked you all individually, and just so they know, I called you all individually just to ask and start the conversation, soft conversations. The conversations were, what are your priorities? The next conversation was, what can you live without, essentially? Like, what are you willing to walk away from the table from? And the last one was, is how motivated you were to come to some sort of agreement. And, you know, I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to me and to think about it reflectively over the weekend and to get to this space so that we can at least have some conversation. So now we're going to get to some of the more difficult statements of what do you think are the challenging spaces, and it speaks to you what you said, Mayor, about some things that you all have not discussed that you wanted to address, that you felt like needed to be addressed. And so I'd like to start with first, and we can do the same way, what do you think that you cannot, that you would have a challenge with if it was not addressed? And everyone has one, right? So if I would ask you all each to give one, that would be helpful. And then, Mayor, if you could sort of go into what you alluded to earlier about some things that you want to discuss, and I said now is the time, actually. So with that, which way would you like to go?
We'll start on my left.
The
Okay.
question is, what is the one challenge?
No, not a challenge, because y'all already expressed your concerns. What is it that in your priority space, that's something that you don't think you can walk away from?
I actually liked your original question, what am I willing to compromise
What are you
on?
willing to compromise? What are you not willing to compromise on? Like, for example, I am never willing to compromise on my anniversary. My husband knows that this is a condition of this long-term relationship, that we get to go to Fabulous Play no matter what he says. You find another person for your patients, and off we go. So, what are you not willing to let go?
I think with 5 people, compromise is necessary, and I think that I'm willing to compromise on almost everything, as long as I can answer the question, is this beneficial to Clearwater? And the answer is yes, then I'm willing to compromise on many things. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. So it's good to say that you're neutral and you're open.
I'm open.
Okay.
I'm pretty easygoing, and I'm always willing to compromise. The only thing that I can't compromise is standing up to Scientology.
Vice Mayor?
Sure. I think for the purpose of this discussion, that I would not want to compromise on giving more resources for staffing, considering that we have over 190 unfilled positions. So I think that's we need to give money to that. That's a non-compromise.
Okay.
Councilmember Albritton?
Well, in my original priority, I was kind of thinking more aligned to what is important today, but I've always had safety as my number one priority, and if you were to ask me, I'm pretty open. I have definite way of thinking, but if somebody can convince me, I'm always open to listen. If they can convince me that there's something better in the way I'm thinking, I'm open for that. But I really am not going to really, safety would be the one thing I think I would not compromise on.
I think we always have to have a long-term perspective, so putting the city in jeopardy fiscally by making decisions that, today seem like the right decision, but in the long term, we can't sustain the decision.
That's very helpful. And so in our next break, we can go and collate that information. Did you have
Okay, that's how you, okay. Or did you want me to put in what they're saying now? And
if you can add it in real time, it'll make our life
Okay,
easier at the
that's
break.
fine.
Yes, okay. So then, with that being said, before we go any further, because I would like to try to navigate, even though I'm walking into a blind space, of what you would like to, that you mentioned something that needed to be resolved, and I said we might want to consider it at this space.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that we need to resolve, but that could take the rest of the day. But some of them that I think are important, they're all on my outline. One of them is, what is the role of city government versus county, state, and federal? I think that's been a discussion that we've danced around a little bit. And I think it would help if we had some consensus on, what our priorities are and what we might go outside of what I believe are our normal marching orders to accomplish.
Okay. Well,
And I think probably, and I'm not trying to, but if there's, this is the only place that we get to discuss things. Obviously for all the citizens who are watching at home, all 3 of you. But this is an opportunity for us to do some of these things. And I think this is one of the areas where probably the vice mayor and I have some disagreements. And it's something that I would like to resolve and also get the input from the rest of the council about where they are on philosophy.
Well, I'm going to do something that I normally don't do, which is step into territory blindly. But that's fine. That is why you all asked me to come today. And I think that I appreciate again that you all were very candid with me collectively and individually. And that was the only thing I asked, is that good faith and candor. Otherwise, you can't have a conversation that moves any needle without that. And everyone can agree to disagree. From an ideological perspective, I think that's important for each of us to understand. None of us are cut from the same cloth. We all have very different life experiences. We all have very different, unique situations that make us who we are. Sometimes we have shifts in our lives that change our priorities. And so that, all of that makes up who you all are as leaders, as family people, as people in the community, as business leaders. And so that's important to be respectful of, but at the same time hear each other. So I'm okay going with that. I think the question specifically, but you all have it in front of you. Do they all have a copy of this?
They do.
Okay. It would be question number 2, what is the role of city government versus county, state, and federal? And I think if it's okay to distill it to what is your philosophy, would that suffice? Okay. So if you want to start with, of who you would like to start with?
Let's start from my right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Role of city government versus county, state, federal. Well, as I told you on the phone, I think financial stability is important. And I told you enhancing mobility and transit is important, especially in our community that's very dense, and revitalizing parts of town that need to be revitalized. I'm happy that we're starting a CRA in North Greenwood. Downtown still moving forward slowly with revitalization and enhancing housing. But I don't think I think there's plenty of help with state and county for social needs. I know the city does spend over $1 million. The police has some in their budget to help with that. But I don't think it's our job to have social programs to help. Using our taxpayer money to help things like homeless, and there's other programs that are kind of out of our realm. So help with the county. Starts with county and then goes up all the way to federal government.
Okay, so what I hear is that from a philosophical space, of course, you're prioritizing and understand the need of the community, but in terms of how it is funded or supported may not necessarily be the role of the city, but rather a triad with the county and state and other services. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I would say the philosophy of the role of city government is certainly we're here to keep our residents safe. So I think safety is first. When I articulated that I think we need to fund staffing to get the work done, that goes for everything from, our economic development department, fire, police, city manager department, all that stuff. We have openings in nearly every department. So in order to get the work done, that's what I meant by funding. But certainly, we need to feel safe in our community, so public safety. We need to have delivery of services. It's just important that I have a police officer, if I need one, that when I turn on my water it works, or when I flush my toilet it goes out and it's not polluting. So all those things are valuable. So safety, delivery of services, and then we need to and then I would say our responsibility as a city government is to ensure that our residents have housing options. They have a place to live. If they want to, if they're working here, they need to have a place to live in our area, in our region. If it's not in incorporated Clearwater, it can be in a surrounding area. And then quality of life, and that's our, we're super proud of our rec centers and our libraries and our beach and all those opportunities that our families have to live enriching lives. But that priority would be safety, delivery of necessary services, housing options, and quality of life. And I believe my philosophy in operating is very, we talk about alignment, and you mentioned you and I being not, in lockstep. I'm incredibly frugal, and, my family, the way I was brought up, the way my husband and I operate in our family is, we don't overspend or overextend ourselves. And it is about being very fiscally prudent. And I would, when I ask questions related to items on the budget, it's with that frugality in mind and accountability and being transparent. And so, that's important to me. But the way I've operated, the way I tend to approach this job is a triple bottom line, in that we look at what is the economic impact, what is the environmental impact, and what's the impact on the social impact. And if we talk about what is the role of our government versus county, state, and federal, I don't subscribe to the notion that dealing with social challenges, our homeless or our people that are struggling to make rent or find affordable housing for them, workforce housing, is that the county can't do it all, the state can't do it all. We need to all partner. We cannot just say that's someone else's responsibility. I pay county taxes, they can deal with it. They don't have enough funding. We're in a crisis. I reviewed that, some of the data at Thursday's meeting, and we have a responsibility to our residents who call Clearwater home and are sleeping in their car. They're working here. So I'm firm in that we need to play a role in dealing with some of our social challenges. We need to partner.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Councilmember Bunker. Yes.
May I comment for just 1 second? I want to say, as you all, this is always the hard part because then posture changes. And then it's my job to keep the posture in an open space. So I would just ask, even if you're hearing things that you really disagree with on all levels, that you still continue to be open to alignment, because ultimately, again, the goal is a budget at some point, not today. The goal is a strategic plan. The goal is, okay, as a group, you all collectively are going to the neighborhoods to say, this is where we agree and this is where we think that we should prioritize our funding based on our agreement. Now we want to hear from you. So at some point, even though you may have strong philosophical differences, again, we want to focus on energy on what we can agree with to get to a solid structure and, continue long-term to work on things that you disagree with and how to get to that space. So with that being said, thank you for allowing me to interrupt.
So the role of city government, well, we have to take care of all the basics, of course. Fire and police, filling potholes, picking up trash. We've got an army of people on staff, very talented people who work wonders every single day, accomplishing all the things that we take for granted. I have to agree with the vice mayor, though, that I think we need to move beyond that from time to time when help is needed. And I think this is a time where help is needed. We certainly stepped out of our lane during COVID when we took a tip from a newspaper article about another small town who was giving away food vouchers to local restaurants. And we started doing that to great success. Is it our job to give people food vouchers? No, but it was very effective. And I think at a time like this, when it comes to housing, we need to look at new ways to partner with people to accomplish something. For instance, in St. Pete, you've got the St. Pete Land Trust and PERC are both working on tiny home communities to help get people into a home. We can bump up our efforts with Habitat for Humanity, but we also might want to find a partner that can create, if we donate some land, a little tiny home community that will help a lot of people affordably find a place to live.
I think the role of the city, like many of us have said up here, it is to take care of our day-to-day needs of our citizens, whether it be safety and, the infrastructure and all that. I do want to see a more extensive planning for the future so that we can implement some strategies and plans to ensure success and prosperity. I'm thinking more along the lines of, actively courting businesses and employers of diverse backgrounds along that line. I do think that we do need to focus more on partnership between county, state, and federal because the city itself cannot accomplish everything. In terms of social services, I think we can provide some, but we have to follow up with the difficult conversation of how we're going to pay for it. So, we're all good, caring people. We all care about our citizens. We all want to help those that are challenged. But which services are we all willing to agree on, and how are we going to budget for it? That's the conversation I think that we need to have. Because the city can't just randomly pay for all the social services that are needed. So partnerships, I think, is also very imperative. And there's a lot of great organizations out there that are doing good work, and we need to work with them. But if we're going to go into that whole let's provide all the social services for all the citizens' issues, we do have to have a hard conversation. How much do we want to get involved? How much do we want to fund? And then where do we get those funds?
Thank you.
So I think most people look at their tax bill and they just pay it. I don't think they looked at the fact that about 38% goes to the school board. And they run schools and busing. And then 26% in Clearwater goes to your local municipality. About 24% goes to the county. Portion goes to PSTA, our bus service. Some goes to SwiftMud, JWB. And that's pretty much what makes up your tax bill. And so the reason I wanted to have this conversation is, again, to understand our lanes. When you and I talked on the phone the other day, I said we're not going to start working on our defense mechanisms. National defense is the purview of our federal government. And so, staying in our lanes is important. Personally, I donate money to charities that I know do a great job of providing social services. In Clearwater, that would be HEP and Salvation Army and others. For me, it still comes back to public safety followed by infrastructure, because nobody cares about the sexiness of what's under the ground until it doesn't work. Quality of life, our economics, and I just think we need a more robust conversation. I don't necessarily think this is the place to have it. Doctor, I think at some point we need to have another work session amongst ourselves to kind of figure out where the priorities are. Because if we decide to go and do something else, and we've had this conversation going back to when Mr. Horn was our city manager, he did not want to increase it, but we need to figure out, and I'm not saying it's wrong to do so, just recognize the fact that we're outside our lane, and then where are we going to take the money from? Because it's a zero-sum game. When we take money to do something outside our purview, we are generally taking it from something else. And I want to be very transparent about what that is. What are we sacrificing? You know, is it boots on the ground with our police department, our fire? Is it our parks and rec hours or facilities? Is it our libraries? But it's gonna be something. Unless we take it out of reserves, which is, you cannot use reserves for ongoing expenses. That is a cardinal rule of budgeting. You don't use reserves for ongoing expenses. Our budget director isn't here, but I can tell you, if she were, she would tell you, you could use it for one-time expenses, but not ongoing. So, that's my philosophy. Pretty easy to understand.
So, sir, I think it was important to have the conversation, so at least now everyone has said how they feel on the record on this particular issue. And again, I know I see the posture stiffening up and everyone, but you all had to say it, right? So you had to say it, and now it's off, and now you all hear it all in one space, not in, different spaces, but you knew what each other was going to say anyway. You all have campaigned, you're all together, you talk to people in the neighborhood, so that's fine. I still hear alignment on two issues, on public safety and staff resources. So when we started this conversation, I'm still waiting for our document, and thank you, Nicole, because I know I'm putting pressure on Nicole. That document did say almost everything you all agreed with except social services. That's what I'm hearing as a facilitator, but in terms of you all's priorities, in terms of how you want the city to function, you all are very clear about where you agree. So I would like to talk about the elephant in the room, the social services, right? Because I think what you said specifically, and I don't, I'm sorry I'm not using your name, I don't like to mispronounce names, so I want to make sure that I say it accurately. But you said, which services do we agree on, and how do we pay for them? And that is the key question, right? If you're going to do it all. So I mentioned to you all that I sit on 7 boards, so I did some research about the boards over here. Use our example in St. Pete first. I sit on the YMCA board, I sit on Academy Prep, and one of the bigger ones I sit on is St. Pete Free Clinic. The St. Pete Free Clinic does a ton of resources, and without going to a PSA for them, because I've done that around the county many times, they're the type of partner that you can align with. So I said, well, who does that in Clearwater? And again, this is my quick research. I don't know if there are other entities. But I called my colleague over there to say, who does the exact same thing over here? And why is that important? Because during COVID, you mentioned giving vouchers. We called our congressional leaders and we said, come down here, state leaders, and come look at the St. Pete Free Clinic and see what's happening in your city and why you have to give more money to the St. Pete Free Clinic and other resources like that, because the lines are increasing. So therefore, it's not hitting the municipality. It's going directly to the services that know what they're doing to give the services properly and efficiently. And before we knew it, we had now Mayor Ken Welch, Charlie Chris, Jeff, Brandis, Daryl Roussan, the likes of all the congressional leaders on all walks of life or the ideology coming to see what's happening and who's doing the best serving so we can allocate resources. So back to my list of names, which you all may know and I just don't know. Hope Villages of America, formerly RCS. Do they do
Religious
it?
Community Services. They don't do health, really.
Okay.
Our big 3 would be the Turley Center, which is run by Baycare and Morton Plant.
Okay.
The Clearwater Free Clinic.
Okay.
And the Willa Carson Center.
Okay. So those are 3. I'm sure that they got that because I wasn't writing that down. Have you heard of the Homeless Empowerment Program? Okay. Of course, we mentioned Habitat for Humanity's Directions for Living. Gulf Coast Jewish Service. So I think between the ones we just named 7 partners that you all could work with. It's been out of my lane for a while because, again, I work for the college now and not for the city. But the city has a program that I believe was at least not started but led by Kanika Tomlin, our former deputy mayor, Healthy St. Pete. I'm sure I might have it. And so the funds were not really directly, my understanding, the funds were to partner with Parks and Recs, and as a result, partner with the service industries to make sure that there was a promotion of, again, I forgot which one of you all said, how do we tell the community about resources that are work, that are funded, that actually can help deliver services? And that may be something that you all just think about, a campaign, a platform, an alliance, if you will, partnering with the organizations that do it best, that have the data drilled down, that know the history of the neighborhoods, that know where there are systemic generational challenges and know how to step in those gaps and fill it. Just something to think about, because it looks like for the priorities that you all mentioned, public safety, resources, and communication, and that sort of like has a effect on transportation, visitation, services, that you all align on all that. It's just the other part. So I don't know, did they get their worksheets yet? So you all have your worksheets now. So now that we've had the harder conversation, and you have 4 little spaces where you can write, I wanted you to write and then share if you had to implement your priority, the priority you suggested. How would you implement that in terms of what type of budget, how much of the budget should go towards your priority? Since you are intimately familiar with the budget and you're intimately familiar with what you care about, now that you have to, sit down and write down, where does this fall? How do you implement this? I think, Vice Mayor, you said in the beginning something very specific, that you wanted resources with a measurable impact, so that the staff had what they needed. So I'm just using you as an example. I hope that's okay. Then you would say what type of resources they need and how you're going to measure it, and how much are you going to do to fund and to distribute resources for, I believe, the 190 jobs that you said need support, for example. So I just asked you all to take 2 or 3 minutes to think about that. You're going to have to say it out loud for the record, but I like to give people writing documents so that they can sort of write down their thoughts. And if you all can do that, and let's see, it's 10:42 my time, so let's give it about 3 to 5 minutes.
So how to implement our priority?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And while you all are writing, I will fill the air. I'll just keep talking. When you're thinking about how you're trying to implement your priority, I think the mayor mentioned that the old strategic plan was outdated. But I do think that all of you all said is important about vision and about long-term planning. And I'll use my experience by example. I mentioned I lived in Illinois. When I moved here in '97, I immediately wanted to move to St. Pete because at my heart I wanted to live in a city. And St. Pete in '97, I think is fair to say without getting in trouble because I don't want any comments, did not look the way it does now. And I was wedded to every part of that change. My family, my father-in-law lived in Bardmore at the time. They literally thought I had lost my mind. Why do you want to go downtown to St. Pete? There is nothing going on in St. Pete. And I was like, give it time, right? And there was a lot of iterations of that time. But I can honestly say that through several mayoral terms now, they did the long strategy, and they got it right. So what have I enjoyed 20 years ago when I was a little bit younger to do some of the things that are now available? But I'm very grateful that the leaders put that work in for the long-term safety, for the long-term vision of activities and balance and development, and there's disagreement about that still too, and for the long-term future of what that looks like for generations. And that's the goal. And how you all get there is hard work, but that's the goal.
Mr. Jennings, is there anything through this process so far that you'd like to comment upon?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Well, look, some of you are still writing and some of you aren't, so we'll give it a couple of minutes. And as you're doing that, I think under your number 3, Mayor, I think you do want to update the plan. I think that's fair to say after listening to everyone. Citizen input, I think collectively, even though it was specific to COVID, I think you all have agreed that citizen input is fair.
Well, we're in a different place than when I wrote this.
But still citizen input. You mentioned the neighborhoods, and I think that's very valuable. I think that the same issues that were identified during this time period about job creation, housing, transportation, zoning, those are still issues that you want to address. Something that you all might think about is have you seen other strategic plans that you want to emulate? I think that's a great question to your number 3. And your final product, I think, ultimately needs to address that big question of, if you are going to make systemic changes on any level, where does the money come from? Every household in America has to have that conversation. Every household in America has to decide what they're willing to sacrifice and what they're not, and hard decisions that you can't resolve every issue. Every family in America has to deal with that. Okay. Are we still writing? No? Okay. At your pleasure, however you want to start.
Lena?
Okay, so my priority is the efficiency and streamlining the processes that affect citizens directly. So I am not intimately familiar with the budget, so that's going to be a challenge for me to get myself acclimated to that. Having said that, we do know, I have heard repeatedly, I have experienced myself some of the challenges going through the processes as a citizen. So one of the things that I would like to have is actually more of a formal citizen input process, hear from them what the challenges are, have the staff also have some involvement in having feedback from each department on how to improve the processes, and also ask them the question whether any the improvement process should be done in-house or actually consider a consultant. And then have that plan implemented, with the various departments. But start from scratch, get the citizens' input, and then move on to the staff, see what their feedback is, see if they want to handle it in-house, or if they're able to, and maybe consider a consulting firm to come to reassess the process, identify what needs to be changed, and then implement that process.
Okay. And this is specific to the goal of addressing communication and making sure that the process is streamlined for people in the community to access city resources.
Right.
So if you were to create, and again, I'm just free speaking here, if you were to create a specific bullet, you might say that the city of Clearwater will either explore resources in the city or hire a consultant to conduct a formal citizen survey to receive input from the 30 neighborhoods in the city, along with conduct a staff climate survey to address deficiencies with the processes of how to access resources. The process would be reviewed, assessed, and then ultimately implemented after leadership's review. So when you're talking about how you're going to address that, that's what I'm asking you all to do, is really start putting tenets into what specifically you're going to do, because then that will lend to the budget process. How much do we have? What category can we take to make this a reality? Thank you.
So when it comes to how can we find a little more money to put into social services, affordable housing, whatever, if we stop funding the Phillies, that would free up a lot of money. I'm not very fond of corporate welfare, and from my understanding, the Phillies are not chipping in extra. The county isn't chipping in extra for the needed goal of keeping them here. So that would free up a huge chunk of cash, and we might want to consider our commitment to natural gas.
So, when you're thinking about this so that you all can come to an alignment space, I always say too that when you're structuring possible alternatives, how realistic is it to implement short-term and long-term? So again, without going down a can of worms, because I am a resident and a happy resident of St. Petersburg, Florida, let me say that again. The raise is an example of different ideology and challenges and ideas about where funding should go. So when you're thinking about the budget and where to move things, I would submit that it's challenging for some people to say where they're willing to take a pocket of money and where they're willing to place it. So as long as you all are willing to continue to have candid conversations about movement, at least you've heard each other. But we also have to be very pragmatic in our approach of understanding what is feasible to create a time frame for actually getting to a budget that you all can pass and live with. Thank you. Next.
Okay, so I had, priority was appropriate funding for staffing, and then how to implement this priority. So I have one question that I need to understand. So if we have over 190 open positions, does our reserve account that we have right now that is very healthy include the funds that would be used to pay for, if we could wave a magic wand and fill all 190 positions, would that pull from our reserve fund? Do you know that answer?
Well, a lot of the positions that are currently not filled are budgeted. So
They're already part of our
they're
150
part of
plus
our
million.
budget,
They're there.
but you wouldn't, if we did not put them in the budget, then you certainly would not ordinarily, fund them from reserves. Because then you would just be whittling down your reserves
Right,
over a
that's
period
right.
of time.
Okay, so
But
they're
those
there.
190 positions are budgeted. Whether they're budgeted at the right salary level,
Right.
that is another discussion, because if they were, then we'd fill them.
Right, agreed, that's part of it, yeah. So, thank you for asking that. Then I would say, we need to allocate funds to make us more competitive. I think we can look at our vesting policies, our vesting of pension, maybe lower it. How do we make ourselves more attractive? Maybe lower it from 10 years to 5 or 6 years. Explore more creative ways to attract employees, including flexible schedules, working remotely. Maybe we have, childcare incentives, things like that. I think we need to think outside of the box to be competitive in our region. And so those are some of the things I thought of.
Okay. So, since we're drilling down, some of these issues, of course, again, longer conversations. I like the fact that you all had conversations, and maybe we'll pivot in the next hour to asking conversations for clarity purposes. But from a budget perspective, again, all businesses are dealing with trying to attract the appropriate workforce based on the scope. A competency study might need to be done to see what is appropriate. But the truth is, of course, the people are reprioritizing where they want to work and play and how they want to work and play. And so maybe that means you don't fill all 190, and maybe that means you right-size some of the salaries and you restructure some of the departments that don't necessarily need the staffing that they did before, or because you're experiencing a geographic shift and changes in the community that you rename some of these positions. So you might want to think, just a suggestion about when you put your tenants into that, which one of these positions are key for the growth of the city, and what type of salaries, looking at your peers around the country, and going back to, I believe, one of the questions and the mayor's discussion of emulating. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for some of these programs. You all can look around for best practices for other cities who may have, figured out a scale for this. But I would say, like, nailing down the language is important for you guys to push the conversation to the next step. So it's really good for you all to hear. And again, you have a wealth of experience, so when you ask questions, again, even if you disagree, at least you have a historical understanding of why and the what, and I think that's important for this discussion too. So thank you.
Well, just to put that all in context too, the new city manager is doing a reorganization, not only of the org chart, but some of the departments. I think he needs to determine what he believes is a right-sized organization. And we may, to your point, we may have to make decisions as to whether there's things that we've traditionally done internally that we may outsource, because we can accomplish what needs to be done by contracting with somebody. May not be full-time, but that they can do certain tasks that ordinarily would be internal, so.
Oh, and I fully agree. And I throw out the 190 because that's the most recent figure of positions that are open. It doesn't mean that I think the only way to operate is to fill all 190,
Right.
slots. But it's a starting point to look at. And there are certainly our priorities of jobs, where we really critically need people now versus others. And part-time, and, that's just, it goes from engineers and, energy innovation managers all the way down to part-time lifeguards and things like that.
And that's important. It's important to have the conversation to see, where is it that we need help? People don't, a lot of everyday people don't care until their garbage is not picked up.
Right.
And then people care a lot. Or during hurricanes and the, poles are not up quickly, or, there's too much debris in my neighborhood, or, and, in cases where there's damage, there's people, then they care right quickly. So then you start thinking about different positions from a different lens. So thank you. Sir.
Councilmember Albrecht?
Yeah, so we did a study years and a half ago or so. Consultant came in and looked at all our employees and recategorized them, I guess, and put them into positions that better described what they were doing, and then also the pay scale. I remember looking at that thinking, it may have been 2 years ago, but I'm really surprised we're in the position now because when that happened, I thought it helped a lot to see if we were competitive. But from talking, the last 6 months or so, and realizing that we've had so many, let's say we're joining a lot of other people across the country that are finding it hard to find employees. In another look at that, I'm for taking a look and seeing why we're losing them. If it's our pension, if it's exactly what it is, and bringing that up to a standard, we're not losing people to other municipalities. So I just wanted to make a comment on that particular thing.
Thank you.
Is that also your comment for
No.
your priority?
No, my priority was, I mentioned affordable housing. So I'm thinking more, instead of drawing more out of the general fund to help this. We've got a lot of, and we have a housing department here that brings in federal money and state money, and it's everybody knows we have a crisis here. But here's the things I think that Clearwater can do to help that without a big draw down of money. We could change the development code allowing more density. So we can look at places where we can maybe have smaller lots with homes, because the land seems to be, well, now the construction costs, but land seems to be the big cost factor in affordable housing. If we can get more houses on same sized parcel of land, that would be more affordable. And also, we have a lot of older homes in our community that have garage apartments. We could look at changing to make that be used for renters, and that would be helpful even for family members, to be able to have somebody live in their garage apartment. And then changes in streamlining permit process for affordable housing. I know we've talked about it, we could do that, and that would help. All that incentivizes in a way that, not monetarily, but it makes it easier, and that's an incentive for a developer that wants to do affordable housing.
Thank you. When you all go to your next session, when you talk again, those are some great starting points to, for you all to evaluate what do you have in place now? And again, looking at best practices of what other cities have done and what's been accepted by the community and what has been rejected by the community. Because I think that is something that is always the hard conversation with affordable housing, is that, I think everyone in their humanity can recognize challenges, but when you start having conversations of what does this look like to a community, you have to have community input and hard conversations about what do zoning changes look like, what do they do, what does the permit process do when you start changing that, and what is the impact to all communities. So, great conversations to start helping you and guide your peers on how to layer your strategic plan with specific goals.
So mine was public safety. Right now we are budgeting about 49.5% between PD and FD. So I don't know if that's the one I'd talk about. I would talk more about long-term perspective. The old saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I want to harken back to 05 through 07, and we were facing a lot of the same issues that we're facing today. A lot of people were leaving the public sector and going to the private sector because the pay was more. The benefits weren't quite as good, but the pay was what led people to leave, and it was competitive. And then affordable housing was a huge issue. Everything was escalating in price, and we had a shortage. Unfortunately, the Great Recession resolved several of those problems. Government was a lot more stable than the private sector, and we saw people come back, and affordable housing took care of itself with a decline of about 40%. I don't know if that's going to happen this go around, but I know that ultimately things reach an equilibrium, and we will probably overbuild in the near future. There's no collusion between rental properties that are being built, and they're being built at an incredible pace. And they're being built because right now they can garner the rents that they want. But my concern is that I don't know if we will move the needle. I would take exception with one thing that Councilmember Albritton said. I don't think it's just the property costs or the density. It's the construction prices, it's our tax structure for affordable housing after the fact. It's the fact that you have to really do mixed levels of income, because the higher incomes tend to subsidize the lower incomes. So there's just a lot of moving parts. And I think we can do our best to help facilitate new affordable properties. But I know this is a problem nationwide. We are not going to find the silver bullet to solve the problem exclusively in Clearwater. That's just not reality. If there was a fix, we'd already have used it.
So then if you're focusing on your long-term perspective and you had to layer some goals for that, what would be your goals?
My goal is oftentimes government, business, families, individuals can be reactive to an immediate problem without understanding the ramifications over the long term. And that a lot of things do tend to resolve themselves with time. And what I don't want to do is be jumping from crisis to crisis, believing we can put out this fire and put out that fire, when in reality I don't know that we can. That doesn't mean we're not a part of the solution. It's just to eradicate, our affordable housing issue, I think is an unrealistic expectation. Or any number of other issues. I mean, homelessness.
Right.
It's a terrible issue. I feel very sorry for the people who are homeless. But if you really sit down and talk to a group, there's a group that does not want to be homeless, for instance. They are in transition. They're looking for help. It may be a very temporary situation. There are also people on our streets that are homeless who have no desire to break that chain. You brought up HEP earlier, which I sat on the board for 5 years. They do a wonderful job of breaking that homelessness chain. But you will also find people with mental health issues that just don't want any limitations on what they do. And they have chosen a lifestyle, and it isn't going to change. It's just an example. I'm not talking about homelessness per se. It's just one of the issues that we have been battling with for decades in the city and in the county and in the nation. I mean, go to Seattle or San Francisco, it's at epidemic levels.
What I'm hearing that I think is important, especially for the purposes of time, because I am going to ask for a 5-minute break, just for us to regroup, is that you all might need another session very specific to evaluating the budget and to housing. Because for the other issues, you all seem to be aligned. You may say it again differently, but you seem to be aligned. You are aligned on public safety, and so that should give some thought process to how the budget should go for that. And you are aligned that the city needs to do an evaluation of how we can get strong employees and a workforce, and how to make sure that the resources are provided to the citizens, and that you should speak to the community. You guys are aligned, so I think that should be key to your strategic plan, since you are aligned on those issues, and it shouldn't be that much more difficult for you to set specific goals to those two tenets. We are here differences of how you address, which is one of the hardest tenets, but it can't be resolved in 45 minutes, is how do you address an issue that is clearly an issue here, but again, to your question, what are you going to take from the budget to pay for it, knowing that you cannot pay for everything, but that is a priority, at least to some of, coming from the bubble of concerns. So going back to this document that I think you all have in front of you, your priorities are still the same. Your layers of it, I think, are really great, strong starting points for discussions. But the last space needs a little bit more time for you all to discuss before you get to a budget discussion. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's fine. I still think we're missing an ingredient, which is, again, hearing from our citizens what their priorities are. And part of going out and having those meetings is that we can not only hear from them, but also impart information to them.
And that's a great starting point. Once you all get to this point where you have the starting phase, I don't know how you all implement, if you invite the public to come to you, or if you go to neighborhood associations, or how you start that process. But I do think that is a process that should start sooner than later, based on this as a starting point.
Mr. Jennings?
The mayor and I spoke with us about scheduling community meetings a few months ago. I spoke with staff at that time, and we are in the process of scheduling those community meetings. We're looking at 3 to 4 community meetings at recreation centers geographically diverse in the city. So hopefully we'll have a few of those scheduled before the end of the month. But
Well, I think we need to think about how we strategically want to do it, because you could start with citizens and then they drive our priorities, or we finish this process, we bring back what we believe are the priorities, and they either confirm them or give us other issues that they think we've missed.
Well,
I think
that's
we're
what-
down the path now that we're gonna have to go for confirmation from them, you know, but,
well, that is one of the reasons why we scheduled this session, was in order for the council to do its preliminary work. Then also, but I imagine that priorities could change after listening to the community. So it is a multi-tiered process. You know, we did the data gathering, and you had mentioned earlier, we have an enormous amount of recent data from the community in various forms. And so, and then of course this session and potentially a follow-up session to this, and the community meetings. So that is what we've kind of always intended.
Vice Mayor.
So I just have a backup, real quick question, just for my learning and understanding, because I can only ask you up here. So when you were talking, Mayor Hibbard, about 0507, we were facing a lot of the same issues. People were leaving the public sector to private sector pay, not so much benefits. Affordable housing was a huge issue. And then you said affordable housing just kind of took care of itself. Just for my understanding, what happened that had it, affordable housing took care of itself at that time?
Well, you had an unbelievable number of foreclosures, rents went down because property values declined by 40%. And that meant taxes went down. There was a lot of inventory available. But up until that point, we had a lot of issues with affordability, and also the difference between what individuals were paying in taxes was a huge thing back then. So there were people that had moved in through the 2003 to 2007 timeframe. They would move in a neighborhood that had same model homes, and one taxpayer would be paying $1,500 in taxes, and the other was paying $10. They were the same house with a flipped plan. The police showed up in the same amount of time. The fire department showed up in the same amount of time. They were equidistant to a rec center, a library, a park. And so one was homesteaded and had Save Our Homes, and one didn't. It was a real issue back then for a lot of people as they moved in, who was paying the freight. And so people that were homesteaded and under Save Our Homes wanted more and more services because the incremental increase in their cost was minimal, whereas the people who had just moved here, it was enormous. But a lot of that, unfortunately, through, you know, a devastating economy, did resolve itself. My point on and I'm not saying we shouldn't be working, you know, on affordable housing within the city. We have 3 different properties right now we're working on. But I do believe what will eventually happen is there will be too much supply that will be put online. Ultimately, prices will start to come down. It's basic economics. It will happen with raw materials. We may not go back to 2019 prices, but I do think you're going to see at least the increase will be at a decreasing rate.
And, okay.
And the
So-
other thing is, I'm sorry,
No.
that we also need to focus on affordability is getting people better training and jobs so that they can afford the inventory that we have, you know? And if we could create more jobs in Clearwater where people didn't have to drive as far and spend as much on gas, you know, and better paying jobs, they would have more resources to pay for market rate, and their quality of life would go up too.
I would agree with that, but I would say we're in a hospitality industry. We still have a majority of workers that are in service and hospitality and, you know, working in restaurants and hotels, and they're never going to be higher paying jobs. And if that's what keeps our, you know, is a big part of our economy, those aren't gonna go away. And those are the workers that we need to have workforce housing for as well. Because and I'm all for job training and higher paying jobs here and different industries or corporate headquarters, but if those people come in, they're going to be taking up the housing stock that we have now, and that just pushes our service industry workers further out. So I you know, working at the jobs level is critical, I agree, but it still doesn't answer all of the people that keep our tourism industry going. What are we doing, you know, for them?
Well, this is a much larger discussion.
Yeah.
A lot of people who start in tourism don't stay in tourism. I mean, you'll see people that are going through college or, you know, they're making a transition. They're in hospitality for a limited window and then they move on to greener pastures.
Well, this also, if I may be why you all need a discussion just on this, with a review of what is the city currently doing. So that is in front of all of you all. You all have had time to review it. Is it successful? Is it not successful anymore? What partnerships you're working on, so you can answer, which I think was the most important question. After you decide what you want to do, what are you willing to shift to pay for it, if at all? So, but review of services before of discussing new innovation might be important, because you might have to sunset some programs, or you might need to strengthen some programs, and that might go into your top priority of what type of staff do you have to implement the programs. Is the department that's leading that, do they have the resources available to do as asked and tasked of them? So those are layered conversations you have upon review of what you're currently doing great and what currently needs improvement. And that might, you know, need you all to drill down to take a look at, from a historical perspective, you know, what programs that you have. And it may involve you talking to staff themselves to say, you know, okay, for the whole affordable housing department, you may have to go and sit with them and talk to them to say what can they sustain as they're trying to implement the goals that you all are setting out for them, and what they might need help with, and what is their specific soft data that can't be quantified from surveys of how they think that they can add to a solution. So I am going to ask for a 5-minute break, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then after we come back, it'll be quick. I'm just going to go freshen up real quick. And then after we come back, I would like us to discuss about next steps and any final thoughts you want to share while you have each other's spaces. And I would also like your documents, if we could give it back to Nicole. So Nicole, she will not get it done in 5 minutes this time. But if she can write some of the things, or I don't know if she was writing in real time, just to update this document so that we all have a clean document for you all. That would be helpful, to the extent you have it, and if not, we can sort of try to align and do what we did before.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then you believe that you can
Well, I don't know. Let's
tie
see
up
what
all this? I think it's going to be longer than 5.
Yeah, let's do, Nicole, what do you say? Because we have 40 minutes left, so.
You want to fill in what has been
I do,
discussed?
briefly. There's no way we can quantify. We want them to have at the end of this a document that you can take back and have next steps for. So, would 10 be sufficient?
10.
I like Nicole.
And then you think we can wrap up by noon?
Unfortunately, I have some obligations at noon that I have to go back with our president.
So do I.
Of course,
So
so-
I need a hard stop.
So I have to have a hard stop. So again, as I said before, as a facilitator, you can't rush this process, and I think all of us have enough life experience to understand that it's hard to make a full, complete document in 3 hours. What you all asked me to do in short order was to get the conversation moving and try to align you. And I think we've done a good job so far in the time that we've been able to pull this together. Where I think you all, again, need more significant time is in this section related to affordable housing. I do think that you could probably come together and say, you know, this is a priority for the budget for resources and for safety and for some of the issues that, of course, are that happen as a result of that. But in terms of affordable housing or issues related to that, you all might need some more time to structure your philosophies along with services, along with what's reasonable in the budget to get done.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll take a 10-minute recess.
Thank you.
don't do
going
it.
well.
I thought you
That's
fell.
all.
My heart just stopped.
So actually, you know what, save.
Are you all ready?
I think so.
Well, we're up.
She's just gonna print, and then she's gonna do the same thing, you're gonna put it up there? Yes, and then we'll be ready.
All right. We'll reconvene the work session.
So we are now down to the final half hour, and I want to give us time before we close out to talk about what do next steps look like for you. And that is an individual process. You know, there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this. And the first thing I would, again, these are just mere suggestions, recommendations based on past experience. Creating a structured timeline that all of you all are willing to agree to. Because the timeline will define how many of the conversations you can have versus when you have to get to action steps. And it is important to have the conversations because you cannot get to action steps without having the conversation. So even though the conversations might be difficult, you just need to have a time frame when you're willing to pivot from having conversations to, okay, guys, we're not going to agree on this. We are agreeing on this, and now it's time to finalize some space. So I think that's important to set the timeline. I think it might be fruitful for everyone to have a review of the budget, to have an understanding of the process of the budget. Sometimes we assume when we take these roles that we all know how these things go. And of course, you having the most senior experience, it might be helpful to have a walkthrough of what this process looks like and why it's important since you have new team members, if you will. The next recommendation I would say is that I don't know how you deal with communities. From my lens with communities, there's always a community leader. Even in an unstructured community, there's a community leaders. And in communities, there's always a person or community leaders that speak for a whole and identifying who those people are as you create these talking sessions, if you will. It's hard to get surveys done. People are inundated and oversaturated with Survey Monkeys and Google Docs and everything. But when you have a community leader, a person who's responsible, they do a good job of really asking their neighbors or putting it in local the monthly news journals that come out in our respective neighborhoods to ask people their thought processes and try to create a fun space for them to come out to talk with you all or for you to go. A place where people are actually going to be. I always say school events are really important. We had some challenges trying to get 2 family members, and I said, well, they're at that football game every week. You might want to try going to that football game and having a stand and having space to talk to people. You have to meet people where they are. And then finally, I would say before you go to the community so that you all are aligned, you can say this is what we've discussed, this is where we are, this is not set in stone, we represent you, but this is our starting point. So those are just some suggestions. One other note of looking at other municipalities that you admire for whatever reason and trying to see what best practices they have that you could sort of include in your space. But with that being said, I'd like you all to talk about next steps, what you foresee are next steps. Those are just generic recommendations across the board that for your consideration.
I'm going to go ahead and start.
Okay.
I think this frankly exceeded my expectations today.
Well, thank you.
On the phone, I did not have high expectations, but I think this has been beneficial. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's still quite a few things that we need to discuss. I also think at some point when we get kind of the outline of the things that are our priorities, then you still have to prioritize them. Again, going back to resources. I do think, we have gathered, and Ms. Costelli, I think, has the majority of the information that we've done from several different surveys. One that we do, periodically on our services, but then one that was specifically done by the preceding company that we were working with that can be a jumping off point. But, COVID's kind of been a deterrent to a lot of public outreach. But I think we're at a point where we can at least go out and we're good at this, going out to our rec centers and really touching every region of the city and getting people's perspective. Now, is that something you are willing to facilitate, or is that something we need to find somebody else to do that?
I would ask for some time because I serve a boss too who gets information quickly, Dr. Williams. So it fits into our schedule. I'm more than willing to facilitate. I would just like to have a moment, to make sure, based on our programming. For those of you all who don't know, we do a lot of, we think, good programming around the county. And so that person there, Sam, who brought me to you all, he runs my schedule.
Understood. I just think we need to be prepared. If you can't,
I'll let you know
who
within the
are we
week.
going to go to next?
Okay, I'll let you know within the week,
Yeah.
and regardless, I'll let you know within the week.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah. Okay, so next steps and final thoughts. I agree. I think it's good to have a review of the budget and where the funds are and which ones. What levers do we have? And so if we want to put it in that format or whatever, but we have data from the comprehensive plan, those priorities that were communicated by our community. So any surveys that we have within the last year or so, it would be nice if, and I'm calling for more staffing, but if somebody wants to distill it down so that we're all kind of looking at key points. Otherwise, we can just have I envision kind of having this packet of key documents that we all agree are the truth and we are looking at as we, go forward with a discussion. I mentioned that, we have 190 openings, so what are the staffing priorities? Or maybe HR can give us a list of if they had what their professional recommendation is as far as prioritizing that. I think we really need to look at the documents that we have where we have signed on in the last 2 years, and we have goals that we've agreed to. And so that would be the Pinellas Housing Compact that we signed on to. Granted, it does not have measurable goals, which is a fault, but it has goals, and it very much relates to our desire to discuss workforce housing in our community. And so I think we really need to have that front and center. We also signed on to Green Print 2.0, which is our environmental plan. Those have goals that we've all agreed to, and that needs to, drive some of our discussion as well. Like you said, I think samples of strategic plans from either surrounding municipalities or municipalities in our state that we think are done right, it would be great to have those to reference. I think it's imperative that we have a list of what are potential supports for workforce housing. Everything from rental mortgage assistance to, gap funding and things like that. But we need updated stats from the county and from HLA that let us know, what are we up against here? And where, is our discussion, I would advise that our discussion is not so much on chronic homeless, chronic street people that have mental health issues and others that are really incredibly challenging to deal with, but more of our everyday employed people, the Alice people, the people that are, income constrained and work in our community and cannot afford housing and food and other essentials. So I think updated data on that really helps put it in perspective. And then also data that shows what other municipalities are contributing to those social supports. I know, St. Pete puts in well over $1 million, and we've put in $250,000 for the last 10 years. It's been stagnant. And so how do we compare that way when we say it's not our responsibility? So anyway, another data point. What are the options for matching funds and things like that? So again, it's an overall education about what is the financial situation we're in right now, and what are the levers and opportunities we have going forward. And then any data we have from residents about what their priorities are, and then sample strategic plans that we think work. Or even if they don't, it's just, these are some options to look at to start with.
Yes, and so I would say that with, you mentioned some very detailed next steps. Your staff probably needs to come and sit with you all to have a conversation, because you're mentioning particular documents or agreements that you might be locked in, or, I mean, you mentioned agreements, but you might have contractual obligations.
Right,
You might have legal obligations from a historical perspective that have to be addressed. And, in terms of sometimes comparing municipalities, that's kind of hard, depending on tax-based structure or what money is coming in. So those are things that have to be contemplated when you're creating policy. Going back again to your question is, what are we going to do? How are we going to pay for it? Talking to the staff is going to be really key. And like I said, I'm sensitive to that, because as a former staff person, it's really nice to say to someone, this is my direction, vision, and what I'd like you to implement. It's much harder when leadership walks away and then the staff has to now figure out with resources how to get the job done. So I think that's important in your analysis.
Thank you. And I would, one other thing, before we, go to the community and we can say, this is what we've discussed, I think the word shape is important to use, as in, we've discussed this and we're bringing them on as a partner to help shape that strategic plan or list of priorities. It's not just, I want your feedback, but help us shape it. It gives them a little more ownership, I think.
And then some of the organizations I was told about from my colleague, I'm sure they have a ton of data too that you all could utilize as you're discussing this and what they're doing to combat things.
Councilmember Albrin.
Well, overall city government is accountable to meeting community needs and, prioritizing these goals in a transparent and accountable manner is really important. I think we're on our way to doing that. What I would say next steps would be is let's go ahead and have a budget review, see where we are. Then I'd like to see another work session to review priorities, after the budget review. And maybe you could add to the budget review some of the input from the comp plan and other data that we've had. That way we can at least get some data back as to what the community is expecting. And then public outreach after that would be really important. I mean, once we get our kind of framework on our document, what's important here, then we go back out and we have meetings with the public and see if we need to modify that in a way to, to make it right. And then after that have a final meeting to put everything together and say, here it is.
Thank you for sharing. I do think that modify has to be embedded in all of you all. When you go to public review, and as you all are more than aware, you have to be nimble with what you hear, because just because you all have had the time to reflect, if they're hearing it for the first time, they just may not agree. And you all represent the same community, people who have been here generations, people who are new to the community, people who are business leaders, people who have different ideological focuses. So the same issues that you all are contemplating here, you're going to hear that magnified, which means you might have to come back and be more nimble based on the percentages. Yes?
So here's what I've seen about past public inputs when we have that. It seems to be the same people show up to all of it, and I don't know if that's really a representative of what everybody thinks, because most people, they don't have a problem, you don't hear from them. I mean, they live their life in a bubble, and as long as we pick the trash up and everything works, they're happy and they don't give input. But we need to somehow reach to those people, get them more of an overall, I don't know, that'd be something that staff would have to figure how we do that in the best way.
Well, again, this is just soft recommendations, take them for what you will. We have a lot of service organizations of people who are connected, from Rotary clubs to Kiwanis clubs. I'm sure I'm a former member of the Junior League in St. Pete area, so Junior League. You have organizations that are minority-based. I'm also involved in African-American organizations. If you start really drilling down on the organizations and talking to their leaders, and then you get a wider swath of the community,
Yeah.
and then if you, again, go into the communities themselves when they are having ordinary programs, and start talking to them then when they're available, not when people are in their everyday work life and they're, shuffling, trying to get through. I think those are important time periods to hear from them, rather than asking people who, in our very busy world, to take time out to come and present. It's just not as feasible as it once was in how we engage with the public. So I do think it's going to require, I'm sure you all have beautiful festivals like we have beautiful festivals. Try to be innovative in how you go out into the community to talk to people, instead of having the same very keyed-in leaders come in.
Well, I think we have to discern some of the information that we receive in the public meetings. I think the other thing that I do want to see if we go out is, again, I'm hoping that we don't just have a laundry list of wants. And I hearken back, Ken, to 0809, and we did some budget meetings that were a little bit different. And the key to those was trying to figure out what truly were the priorities of citizens. And so we gave them basically a fictitious budget with poker chips that had denominations on them. There was not going to be enough chips for them to pay for everything. And it was a process that kind of crystallized what people wanted to spend money on, because they had to make a decision of eliminating something.
Yes.
And rather than just having this fictitious unlimited budget, which does not exist, it was very helpful back then.
And I actually think something like that is very innovative, because people sort of have glossy eyes when you talk about numbers and just city priorities. I mean, this is just the truth when you're dealing with average people who care, usually when they're coming to you about one thing that is important to them. When you give them the broader perspective and you try to say and show them visually, this is how much we have, and we have a lot of people to serve. It might be helpful to do, again, some creative ways to talk to citizens about what is realistic. Again, what do we have, and how much can we spread ourselves thin? Thinking about the long-term game of sustainability for your city.
Councilmember Bunker.
It was a good discussion, and thank you so much for moderating it.
Thank you.
I am just going to look forward to the next step, whichever next step we take.
In my mind, the next step would be community involvement and what that's going to look like, so that we can have an accurate depiction of what that is. I do agree with a lot that's been said. We have to present it in a different way. Educate first, and then collect the information, not just a wish list, because that would be, I think, useless information. But we would have to be creative, because what we've been doing right now has, I don't think, provided an accurate depiction, because it's always the same active people that show up. So we do have to be creative. Having said all that, because I do agree with a lot of that's been said, this session to me showed me how much we need another one, if not maybe two, because reviewing your questions that you provided, Mayor Hibbard, there's a lot here that I do want to talk about, that I do want to hear from the rest of the council on how they feel, because I think they're maybe not the number one priority, but they are important enough to discuss it. So the next step is community involvement, and schedule another work session, because there's a lot I need to learn from you guys and communicate as well.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close with the last question, which no one ever likes when I do this, so I'm sorry in advance. I'm going to ask you to ask a question to any of your peers, but then for them to not answer it. They can just think about it and then be reflective, and in their own time, when you all gather again, have a good answer with data and support. So think about a question that you really want to know, that you've not asked, that you need that information, but instead of asking someone to come off and just say a statement, but for them to go and figure out an appropriate response that addresses your question. And then we'll close with that, and at the mayor's pleasure, his comments, and however he wants to end.
Okay.
You can take a minute for that, because I know that's kind of hard. Sorry, I said sorry ahead of time.
Well, I'll start. I'd ask the vice mayor, one of the things in my list is ROIs. And, you know, what is an ROI that is acceptable and what are ROIs that aren't, as far as timeframes to recoup your investment.
Before you finish, Nicole, did you get that?
Yeah.
She did.
Okay, or just wanted to make sure.
Can I ask just a clarification?
But
No?
you can, but just not answer it.
No, I won't. So is this ROI on any type of an investment pertaining to?
Well, some of the ones that I think are near and dear to your heart.
Okay, that's fine. I like the question. Thank you very much.
Good, I'm glad I pleased you. Councilmember Albritton.
Okay, so it's a question to Mr. Bunker. So understanding your position with Scientology, we've had 50 years, give or take, of them being here. Nothing seems to have worked so far. We've had past run-ins with them, and I think we've always never really seen eye to eye. I know you are against them. Well, let me rephrase it. How do you see us with them here moving forward with revitalizing our downtown?
Okay, so you cannot answer. At the next time period, you have to have support for his question. Thank you.
Councilmember Teixeira.
I guess I'm just drilling down a lot. I want to ask you, what strategic plans, if any, have you seen that you would like to emulate? So we're not reinventing the wheel.
Okay. Councilmember Bunker.
Well, I'll ask you because you're new. Do you think we should consider Scientology a partner?
To be blunt,
Nope.
No, you're not answering.
I was just gonna say, no, I was just gonna say, to
Let's
be
see your
blunt.
follow direction.
No, I was just gonna say, to be blunt, I knew you were gonna ask me that. That's all I was gonna say.
I didn't.
I did.
You can answer later with substantive support for the question.
Vice Mayor.
Trying to figure out how to phrase this. How do you, this would be
Who
to
is
Mayor
this to?
Hibbard.
Okay.
So how do you justify our lack of parity in supporting social service agencies in our county in comparison to primarily St. Pete? So, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
you got it?
I got it. Could
Your
answer
lovely
now,
team
but I
has it
won't.
too. I'm watching them in real time. I stopped writing once I saw that you all got the flow of what I was doing. So, sir, I've completed you all's request. and I'm going to turn it back for you for closing. I want to thank each of you again. It's always hard to ask, to say to people, just, it seems very simple, but to ask people to act in good faith, to be honest, and to listen is one of the hardest skills I think all of us have as human beings. And you all listened, and you all came with open minds, and you listened to each other today, and I hope your conversation moves forward better because of it. And thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to facilitate this. And on behalf of St. Petersburg College, your county, your city matters. I don't think people understand that St. Pete stretches from Tarpon all the way to South St. Pete. We care about all the cities because our students are firmly embedded. They are your workforce. They are who lives here. They are your future leaders. They are the reason why we do so much for the respective cities within the county. So thank you for allowing us to be here and for moving the needle a little bit more.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I think it was a good session. I appreciate the very candid conversation between all the council members. Is there any items that anyone would like to have come forth in the future not relating to strategic planning?
But, well, this is just a little tag on. Can we have some idea of a time frame? Like, we talk about next steps, but are we talking, I know there was mention of trying to reach out to residents with some sort of a survey perhaps by the end of the month, but, I mean, what are we looking at for the next couple of months for steps?
Well, the survey's already been done. We've
The
already got the
comprehensive
survey. No, we also did another survey with USF, did they not, Joelle? Yeah.
She tagged on a couple of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got the data from that perspective. I think the limiting factor right now is going out to the public and how many meetings are we going to have? Are we going to have one at every rec center? Are we going to be a little more condensed than that? My hope is, that we could get this done. I'd really like to see us done in 8 weeks. I think that may be overly ambitious, unfortunately. It's a shame not to have this in place prior to us going into full budget discussions, because then you push out to 2023. And that was not what I envisioned when we started out on this process. But I think we also have to be realistic.
I would say also it's better to do it right than rushed.
Right.
So as much as all of us, we have these time frames, I would suggest, again, spending some time with the data, collecting it. But now that you have a sufficient amount, to review it with your staff and sort of hone it into a space where it's not overwhelming, creating categories of what you've learned from it. Because again, I'm not speaking for all citizens, the general citizen, when they're taking time away from their kids in baseball and ballet and food and dinner, don't want to sit for hours at a meeting hearing, that. They want a more productive space where they're spending their time when you all go out to meet with them.
So Dr. Jackson,
Kimberly.
as you, I'm going to use Dr. Jackson in this instance because I'm going to get very professional about
Yes,
it.
okay.
As you said at the onset, we're not being charged for this.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's great from a budgetary standpoint, sometimes I like paying somebody because then I can set expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I were contracting with you right now, I would say, this is the time frame I want to get this done in, and this is the byproduct that I want to see. And I don't feel like I have that luxury in this current relationship.
No.
And so, at some point, we need to know whether you feel like this is an endeavor that you want to continue with, or whether we do need to find another party.
Right, so I would just say, from the perspective of, I mean, most of us are familiar with government structure. I'm a direct service organization embedded in the college. I have 15 board members that I report to, along with the college side. We have programming in place that I cannot change or alter in terms of possibly meeting your time frame. And so most of this is my specific expertise, if you will. And so we have a small team of collating all that. So there's myself, Sam, a web content specialist or a visual media specialist, and my assistant. So it would depend on the scope of what you're asking, but more importantly, because we have not done this particular type of work before, I've done it in my personal capacity, but not in my work capacity. I don't know what either my board or our leadership would say. Ultimately, I report to the president and the board of trustees for St. Petersburg College. So that's why I said I would be disingenuous if I said yes and didn't get an appropriate response. I'll try to get that as quickly as possible from you all to guide you, and then happy because of my record within the community. We have a lot of great attorneys and mediators, not necessarily corporations who can do that. The Clearwater Bar Association, they have hundreds of me's that I think would do a really great job too. So I just wanted to be honest about that. When we were asked, quite frankly, I was out of town, and Sam said, my associate director, soon to be project coordinator, I need you to do this little navigation of Clearwater. And so I was like, oh, sure, certainly. And then as I started reading, I was like, this is not little, Sam. But like I said, I'm a public servant. I'm always happy to serve. I love the importance of government. And also, although I never share my personal philosophy, I love people to understand the scope of government, and that is an education process. And then where you fall after you are educated about the process is how you all lead. But it is important to have these conversations so that you can actually, mesh and align. So I hope I've answered your question. That's why I can't speak. I don't even think we would have anything to tell you what something like this would be. But I will follow up.
But you can understand my concern, and probably the rest of the council's, if we change horses a third time, this is not good process. It just isn't.
And I'm sorry I didn't know the history enough to know about some of the challenges in the past, but I'm actually happy because I like to start fresh. So it was helpful for me not to know that vast history. So
Very good.
in any event, we will get back with you, and we can, whoever you all decide to call for us to discuss and try to hash this out, happy to do that.
Well, it would be through Mr. Jennings.
From Mr. Jennings.
So.
We'll follow up, Mr. Jennings.
Okay. Thank you all. We're adjourned.